I was watching the morning news with my coffee when someone started hammering on my front door like they were trying to break it down. It was barely 7 in the morning on a Saturday in February, and I'd just gotten comfortable in my favorite chair after shoveling the driveway for the second time that week. The snowstorm that had hit Lakewood, Colorado the night before had dumped another 8 inches on top of the foot we already had, and I was planning to spend the rest of the weekend doing absolutely nothing. The pounding continued, more aggressive now. I set down my mug and walked to the door, already annoyed. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see a woman in a puffy purple coat gesturing wildly at my roof. Great. I knew exactly who this was going to be. I opened the door to find Brenda Patterson, the president of our homeowners association, standing on my porch with her phone raised like she was documenting evidence of a crime scene. Her blonde highlights were perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her lip gloss was so shiny I could probably see my reflection in it from 10 feet away. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, my name dripping with disdain. "I'm here to inform you that you're in violation of the HOA Covenant Rules, Section 12, Subsection 4. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "Good morning to you too, Brenda. What exactly am I being accused of this time?" She pointed at my roof with a manicured finger, nearly dropping her phone in the process. The excessive snow accumulation on your roof is an eyesore and a safety hazard. According to our rules, all homeowners must maintain their properties in a manner that preserves the aesthetic integrity and safety standards of Pine Ridge Estates. I looked up at my roof. Yes, there was snow on it, just like there was snow on every other roof in the neighborhood. Just like there was snow on her roof, visible 3 houses down the street. "Brenda, we just had a major snowstorm. Everyone has snow on their roof." "Not like that," she insisted, zooming in with her phone camera. "Your accumulation is clearly more than 2 inches above the neighborhood average. I've documented it thoroughly. You have 48 hours to remove it or face a $500 fine. Additionally, there will be a $50 per day penalty for each day you remain in non-compliance after that period." I had to physically restrain myself from laughing in her face. In my 15 years as a county building inspector, I dealt with plenty of petty bureaucrats, but Brenda Patterson took the cake. She'd been making life miserable for everyone in Pine Ridge Estates since she'd gotten elected HOA president 8 months ago. So far, she'd fined old Mrs. Chen for having wind chimes that were too loud, threatened the Kowalskis with legal action because their teenage son's truck was parked on the street overnight, and tried to force the Hendersons to remove their vegetable garden because it attracted wildlife. "Brenda, there's no HOA rule about snow removal from roofs," I said calmly. "Actually, there is. I added it to the bylaws last month during our board meeting. All updates are legally binding as per the Master Covenant." "Was there a quorum at that meeting?" She blinked. "Excuse me, a quorum?" "You know, the minimum number of board members required to be present for votes to be valid. According to your own HOA bylaws, you need at least 4 out of 7 board members present." Her face flushed slightly. "We had 3 members present, which is sufficient." "No, it's not." "Which means any rules you passed are null and void." I'd actually read the HOA bylaws cover to cover when I bought the house, precisely because I'd heard horror stories about overzealous HOA boards. It was part of my job to understand regulations and codes, and HOA covenants fell into that category. Brenda's jaw clenched. "That's a technicality. The spirit of the rule still applies. Your roof is a hazard, and I'm protecting the community." "My roof is engineered to handle the snow load we get in Colorado. In fact, All roofs in this development are built to withstand at least 40 pounds per square foot of snow load, which is well above the International Building Code requirement for this elevation and climate zone. What we have up there right now is maybe 15 pounds per square foot, tops. I don't care about your technical jargon, she snapped. I'm issuing you a citation. You'll receive formal notice by mail within 3 business days. If you wish to contest it, you can appear before the HOA board at our next meeting on the 20th. She spun on her heel and marched back down my driveway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice in her impractical high-heeled boots. I watched her get into her white BMW SUV with the vanity plate that read HOPRES and drive away. I closed the door and went back to my coffee, which had gone lukewarm. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Frank Morrison. Did the HOA which just hit your place saw her taking photos of your house? I typed back. Yep, apparently I have too much snow on my roof. 3 dots appeared immediately. Are you kidding me? She's lost her mind. My wife is furious. Brenda cited us last week because our mailbox post is apparently half an inch too tall. I wasn't surprised. Brenda had been on a citation spree lately, and I'd been wondering when she'd get around to me. I'd managed to fly under her radar for a while, probably because I kept my property in good shape and didn't give her any obvious ammunition. But I should have known she'd find something eventually. The truth was, I'd been keeping a mental file on Brenda's activities for the past few months. As the county building inspector for Jefferson County, I took violations of code seriously, whether they were in commercial buildings, residential properties, or even HOA common areas. And Brenda's reign of terror had caught my attention for more than just personal reasons. About 6 weeks ago, I'd been driving through Pine Ridge Estates on my way home when I noticed construction activity at the community clubhouse. Curious, I'd stopped to take a look. What I found concerned me. They were adding a significant addition to the building, including a new deck and pergola structure, but I couldn't find any record of permits being pulled for the work. In Colorado, any structural addition requires proper permits and inspections to ensure it meets safety codes and zoning requirements. The permit process isn't just bureaucratic red tape. It's there to make sure buildings don't collapse, electrical systems don't cause fires, and plumbing doesn't contaminate water supplies. I'd made a note to look into it, but I'd been swamped with a massive commercial project downtown and a string of emergency inspections after a contractor had been found using substandard materials. The HOA clubhouse had slipped down my priority list, until now. Monday morning, I arrived at the county building department office at 8 sharp. My colleague, Patricia Hughes, was already at her desk, sorting through a stack of permit applications. "Morning, Rob," she said, glancing up. "How was your weekend? Interesting." "Got cited by my HOA for having snow on my roof," she laughed. "You're joking." "I wish." Brenda Patterson, our illustrious HOA president, showed up at my door Saturday morning with her phone camera ready to document my violations. Patricia shook her head. "That's the same HOA that was in the news last year, right? Something about them trying to ban anyone from parking in their own driveways." "That was before Brenda took over. She's taken things to a whole new level." I set my bag down at my desk and logged into the county database. "Actually, I wanted to check something. Do we have any permits on file for work at the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse? Address would be 8842 Pine Ridge Circle." Patricia rolled her chair over to look at my screen as I pulled up the property records. We scrolled through the permit history for the address. There were permits from when the clubhouse was originally built in 2008 and a permit from 2019 for some minor electrical work, but nothing recent. "What kind of work are they doing?" Patricia asked. Significant addition. At least 400 square feet, maybe more. New deck, pergola, looked like they were expanding the kitchen too. Her eyebrows shot up. And no permits. That's a major violation. That's what I thought. I'm going to drive by there on my lunch break and take another look. The morning passed in a blur of plan reviews and phone calls. I approved permits for a residential remodel in Evergreen, failed an inspection on a restaurant in Golden where the contractor had installed the grease trap wrong, and answered about 15 emails from homeowners who had questions about deck regulations. At noon, I grabbed my inspection jacket and county truck and headed toward Pine Ridge Estates. The development sat in the hills west of Lakewood, a planned community of about 200 homes built in the mid-2000s. The houses were nice, if a bit cookie-cutter, mostly two-story colonials and craftsman-style homes in beige, gray, and muted earth tones. The HOA maintained common areas including a small park, walking trails, and the clubhouse. I pulled up to the clubhouse and immediately saw that the construction was still ongoing. A work crew was there, installing siding on the new addition. I parked and got out, making my way toward the site. A man in his 40s wearing a tool belt noticed me approaching. His eyes dropped to the Jefferson County Building Inspector badge clipped to my jacket, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Morning," I said. "I'm Rob Zimmerman with the county, just doing a routine check. Can you tell me who pulled the permits for this project?" The man glanced at the clubhouse, then back at me. I don't handle that side of things. I just do the work. You'd need to talk to my boss." "And who's your boss?" "Gary Mitchell. He runs Mitchell Construction. He's not here today, though." "That's fine. Do you know if permits were pulled?" "There should be a permit placard posted somewhere visible on the site." The man shifted his weight. "I don't know about any permits. Gary told me the HOA had everything handled." That was a red flag. Contractors are required to verify permits before starting work, and reputable ones always do. "What's your name?" "Steve. Steve Larson." "Steve, I'm going to need to see the site supervisor or project manager. Is there anyone here who can show me the permit documentation? Like I said, Gary's not here, and I don't have access to that stuff." I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the work in progress. "All right. I'm going to need you to stop work immediately until permits are obtained and approved." Steve's face fell. "You're shutting us down." "I'm issuing a stop work order, yes." Construction without proper permits is a violation of county code. Once permits are pulled and approved, and the work that's already been done passes inspection, you can resume. Man, Gary's going to be furious. Gary should have made sure permits were in place before starting the project. "Do you have contact information for whoever hired you? The HOA president or board member?" Steve pulled out his phone and scrolled through it. "Yeah, we've been dealing with Brenda Patterson. She's the HOA president." He showed me her number. I already had it, of course, since we lived in the same neighborhood, but I noted it down officially. "Thanks. I'll be in touch with her. In the meantime, all work stops as of right now. I'll be posting the stop work order on the site." I went back to my truck and filled out the official notice, a bright red form that I then posted prominently on the clubhouse door. Steve and his crew were already packing up their tools, making phone calls. I didn't envy Gary Mitchell the conversation he was about to have with Brenda Patterson. Back at the office, I called the number Steve had given me. Brenda answered on the second ring. "Hello, Miss Patterson, this is Rob Zimmerman from the Jefferson County Building Department. I'm calling regarding the construction project at the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse." There was a pause. "What about it?" "I conducted an inspection today and found no permits on file for the work being done. I've issued a stop work order until proper permits are obtained and approved." That's ridiculous. We're an HOA. We don't need permits for work on our own property. I kept my voice professional. Actually, you do. Any structural addition, regardless of property ownership, requires permits and inspections. This is Colorado state law and county code. The work cannot continue until permits are in place. This is harassment, she said, her voice rising. You live in this neighborhood. You're doing this because you're upset about the citation I gave you. Miss Patterson, I'm conducting my duties as a county building inspector. I would have issued this stop work order regardless of where I live or what personal interactions we've had. The law applies to everyone equally. We'll see about that. I'm calling the county administrator. She hung up. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my temples. This was going to be a mess, but it was the right thing to do. Building codes existed for a reason, and HOAs weren't exempt from them. Sure enough, an hour later, my supervisor, Martin Reed, called me into his office. Martin was in his late 50s, a career building official who'd been with the county for 30 years. Rob, I just got an interesting phone call from a Brenda Patterson. She's claiming you're abusing your position to harass her HOA. I'd expected this. I issued a stop work order today for unpermitted construction at the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse. It's a significant addition, easily 400 square feet or more with structural, electrical, and probably plumbing work. No permits were pulled. Martin nodded slowly. And you live in Pine Ridge Estates. I do. But that doesn't change the fact that they are in violation. I would have issued the same order anywhere in the county. I believe you, Martin said, but this could get complicated. Miss Patterson was very insistent that you have a personal vendetta against her. She cited me for having snow on my roof this weekend. She's been on a citation spree for months, fining residents for minor or completely made-up violations. But that's not why I issued the stop work order. I drove by the clubhouse 6 weeks ago and noticed the construction. I finally had time to follow up on it today. Martin pulled up the case file on his computer. Did you document everything properly? Photos, conversations, the works. I followed protocol exactly. Good. Then we're fine. If she wants to file a complaint, she can, but the stop work order stands until they get their permits in order. He leaned back in his chair. Between you and me, HOAs think they're above the law sometimes. They're not. If anything, they should be held to a higher standard since they're managing common property that affects the whole community. That's how I see it. Keep me posted on this one. Something tells me it's not going to be simple. He was right about that. Over the next 2 days, I received increasingly aggressive emails from Brenda, demanding that I rescind the stop work order and accusing me of everything from corruption to professional misconduct. I responded to each one professionally, reiterating the requirements for obtaining permits and offering to expedite the review process if they submitted complete applications. On Wednesday, I got an email notification that Pine Ridge Estates HOA had submitted permit applications for the clubhouse addition. I reviewed them that afternoon and immediately found problems. The plans showed structural changes that didn't meet current building code requirements for snow load, which was especially ironic given Brenda's obsession with snow on roofs. The electrical plans were incomplete, missing details about circuit sizes and panel locations. The plumbing plans didn't show proper venting for the new kitchen drains. I wrote up a detailed list of corrections needed and sent it back to the engineer of record. That night, my phone rang at 8 o'clock. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Is this Rob Zimmerman?" A man's voice asked, speaking. "This is Gary Mitchell from Mitchell Construction. Listen, I need to talk to you about this stop work order. We've got contracts deadlines. The HOA is breathing down my neck. Is there any way we can work something out? I kept my voice even. Mr. Mitchell, the stop work order stays in place until you have approved permits. Your client didn't pull permits before starting construction, which is a serious violation. Even if permits are approved tomorrow, I'll need to inspect all the work that's already been completed to make sure it meets code. Come on, man. It's just an HOA clubhouse. It's not like it's a hospital or something. Building codes apply to all structures. If that addition isn't built correctly, it could collapse. Someone could get hurt. I'm sure you don't want that liability. Gary sighed heavily. Fine. But you need to know Brenda Patterson is losing it. She's threatening to sue everyone, me, you, the county. She's talking about going to the press, making a big stink about how you're abusing your power. Then she should probably focus her energy on getting the permit applications corrected so we can move forward. After I hung up, I sat on my couch and stared at the TV without really watching it. I didn't want a war with my HOA, but I also couldn't ignore code violations just because it was convenient. This was exactly the kind of situation that made my job both important and difficult. Friday afternoon, I received the corrected plans. The engineer had addressed most of my concerns, though I still had questions about the deck support structure. I called the engineer, a guy named Tom Brennan, and we talked through the calculations. He agreed to revise the plans one more time with additional support posts. I was getting ready to leave for the weekend when Patricia stopped by my desk. Hey, did you hear about the Pine Ridge Estates thing? I looked up. What about it? Brenda Patterson filed a formal complaint with the county administrator's office. She's claiming you targeted her HOA because of a personal dispute, and that you're preventing them from making necessary safety improvements to the clubhouse. Necessary safety improvements. She added this construction project to the budget because she wanted a bigger space for HOA social events. It has nothing to do with safety. I'm just letting you know. Martin wanted me to give you a heads up. There's probably going to be an internal review of your decision to issue the stop work order. I thanked her and headed home, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. An internal review wasn't a huge deal if everything had been done properly, which it had, but it was still a hassle. It meant paperwork, meetings, and having my decisions scrutinized by people who weren't as familiar with the specifics of the case. Saturday morning, I was woken up by my doorbell ringing at 9. I stumbled to the door in my sweatpants and t-shirt to find Frank Morrison standing there with a Tupperware container. Morning, Frank said, holding up the container. Julie made banana bread and thought you might want some. Also, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. I invited him in and put on a pot of coffee. Frank settled at my kitchen table and pushed the container toward me. Brenda's calling an emergency HOA meeting Monday night, Frank said. She's put an item on the agenda about taking legal action against you. I opened the container and broke off a piece of banana bread. Legal action for what? She's claiming you're harassing the HOA and that you've exceeded your authority as a building inspector. She wants the HOA to hire a lawyer to sue you personally and file complaints with the county. She can't sue me personally for doing my job. I know that. You know that. But she's got half the board convinced that you're the villain here. She's been calling everyone, telling them that you shut down critical safety work at the clubhouse because you're mad about the snow citation. I took a sip of coffee and tried to process this. The snow citation that's based on a made-up rule she passed without a proper quorum. Exactly. But she's not mentioning that part. Frank leaned forward. Look, there's a group of us who are fed up with her. The Morrisons, the Chens, the Kowalskis, the Hendersons. We're planning to show up at the meeting and push back. I wanted you to know you're not alone in this. I appreciate that, Frank. But you should know, I'm not backing down on the stop work order. The clubhouse construction violated code, and that's a fact. We figured as much. And honestly, most of us think it's about time someone held her accountable. She's been acting like a dictator for months. After Frank left, I spent the rest of the weekend researching HOA law in Colorado. I wanted to understand the full scope of what Brenda could and couldn't do, both in terms of citations and in terms of the board's authority to take legal action. What I found was enlightening. Colorado had passed several laws in recent years to protect homeowners from abusive HOA practices. HOAs had to follow their own bylaws, which meant Brenda's snow rule was indeed invalid without a proper quorum. They couldn't fine residents without proper notice and an opportunity to be heard. And they certainly couldn't use HOA funds to pursue frivolous lawsuits against individuals without approval from the membership. Monday evening, I walked into the clubhouse at 7 o'clock for the emergency HOA meeting. The parking lot was packed, which was unusual. Most HOA meetings struggled to get a dozen people to show up, but tonight it looked like half the neighborhood was there. The meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where the board sat. Brenda was in the center, flanked by 3 other board members: Doug Carlson, an accountant, Linda Martinez, a retired teacher, and Jeff Brennan, who worked in tech. 3 seats at the table were conspicuously empty. I took a seat in the back row. Frank and his wife Julie were a few rows ahead, and I recognized the Chens, the Hendersons, and several other neighbors scattered throughout the room. Everyone was murmuring, and the energy felt tense. Brenda called the meeting to order by banging a gavel on the table. "Thank you all for coming. We have an urgent matter to address tonight regarding actions taken by a resident that have significantly impacted our community." She launched into a dramatic retelling of the stop work order, painting me as a vindictive neighbor who was abusing my position as a county building inspector to retaliate against the HOA for rightfully enforcing community standards. According to her version of events, the clubhouse renovation was a critical safety project that I had shut down out of spite. When she finished, Doug Carlson spoke up. "I move that we authorize the board to retain legal counsel to pursue action against Rob Zimmerman for misconduct in his capacity as a county official, and to seek damages for the delays and financial losses caused by his actions." "I second," Linda Martinez said quickly. "Discussion?" Brenda asked, though her tone made it clear she didn't actually want any. Frank stood up. "I have a few questions. First, were permits pulled before the construction started?" Brenda's expression hardened. "We're an HOA. We don't need permits." "Actually, according to Colorado law, any structural addition requires permits regardless of who owns the property," Frank said. "So the stop work order was legitimate, right?" "That's a matter of interpretation," Brenda said dismissively. "It's really not," I said, standing up. All heads turned toward me. "I'm happy to explain the situation from my perspective if the board is willing to hear it." Brenda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "This isn't your platform, Mr. Zimmerman." "Actually, if you're going to discuss taking legal action against me, I have a right to respond," I said. "Colorado HOA law is pretty clear about that." Linda Martinez whispered something to Doug, who nodded reluctantly. "I suppose we should hear him out." I walked to the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. 6 weeks ago, I noticed construction happening at the clubhouse. As a building inspector, I'm trained to recognize when work requires permits. Last Monday, I stopped by to check on the project and confirmed that no permits had been pulled. I issued a stop work order, which is standard procedure for unpermitted construction. "You only did that because I cited you for violations," Brenda interrupted. Actually, the timeline doesn't support that. I noticed the construction in early January, more than a month before you showed up at my door. I issued the stop work order because it was the right thing to do, not because of any personal issue. Building codes exist to protect people. If that addition isn't built correctly, it could collapse. People could be injured or killed. Mrs. Chen stood up, her small frame radiating indignation. Since we're talking about citations, I have a question for Brenda. Why did you fine me $50 for having wind chimes in my backyard? I checked the bylaws and there's no rule against wind chimes. They were creating noise pollution, Brenda said. They were not. They're tiny little chimes that you can barely hear. You fine me because you don't like me. Other hands started going up around the room. Tom Henderson stood. You threatened to fine us for our vegetable garden. You said it was attracting rabbits and deer, but we're in Colorado. Wildlife is everywhere. You can't fine people for that. And you towed my son's truck, Frank Morrison added. He parked on the street overnight one time because the driveway was full, and you had it towed without warning. That cost us $300. Brenda's face was getting redder by the second. All of those citations were valid under HOA rules. What rules? I asked. Because I've read the bylaws cover to cover, and most of what you've cited people for isn't in there. And the rules you have been adding, like the snow removal requirement, weren't passed with a proper quorum. That's not true. Actually, it is, Linda Martinez said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She looked uncomfortable but continued. We only had 3 board members at the meeting in January when we passed those new rules. Rob's right, we needed 4 for a quorum. I brought it up at the time, but Brenda said it didn't matter. Brenda whirled on her. You're seriously going to undermine me right now? I'm not undermining you. I'm stating facts. Linda looked at the crowd. For what it's worth, I don't think we should be spending HOA money on a lawsuit against Rob. He was doing his job. We should have pulled permits before starting the construction. I agree, Jeff Brennan said. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. Doug Carlson looked between Brenda and his fellow board members, clearly trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. Maybe we should table this discussion until we have more information. We don't need more information, Brenda snapped. We need to take action. Against what? A voice called from the middle of the room. It was Mark Henderson. Against a building inspector who was doing his job. That's insane. The room erupted into cross-talk, with multiple people trying to speak at once. Brenda banged her gavel repeatedly, but it took almost 5 minutes to restore order. Finally, Frank stood again. I move that we vote no confidence in Brenda Patterson as HOA president and that we hold new elections for the board. I second, Mrs. Chen said immediately. Brenda's face went from red to purple. You can't do that. Actually, we can, Frank said, pulling out a printed copy of the bylaws. Article 7, Section 3. Any board member can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the membership present at a duly noticed meeting. This is a duly noticed meeting, and we have a quorum of homeowners present. I glanced around the room and did a quick count. There were at least 70 people there, which was well over the required 20% of homeowners needed for a quorum on membership votes. This is ridiculous, Brenda said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. All in favor of removing Brenda Patterson as HOA president. Frank called out. A forest of hands went up. I didn't raise mine since I was directly involved in the situation, but it was clear that the vast majority of the room supported the motion. All opposed. Maybe 5 hands went up, including Brenda's and Doug's. The motion passes, Frank declared. Brenda stood up so abruptly that her chair fell backward. This is illegal. I'm calling our lawyer. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, her heels clicking angrily on the tile floor. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Linda Martinez cleared her throat. "Well, I suppose we need to elect a new president. I nominate Frank Morrison." "I second," Mrs. Chen said. Frank looked surprised but nodded. "I'll serve if the community wants me to." There were no other nominations, and Frank was elected by unanimous voice vote. The rest of the meeting was spent discussing what to do about Brenda's citations, the clubhouse construction, and how to prevent this kind of situation from happening again. By the time I left at 9:30, Frank had appointed a committee to review all of Brenda's citations and determine which ones were valid. The board had also voted to immediately retain a new engineer to review the clubhouse plans and work with me to get the permits approved. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in days. When I walked into my house, my phone was already buzzing with texts from neighbors thanking me for standing up to Brenda and apologizing for not speaking up sooner. The next morning, I received an email from Martin Reed asking me to come see him. When I got to his office, he was reading something on his computer screen. "Brenda Patterson withdrew her complaint," he said without preamble. "Really?" "Yep. Sent an email at midnight last night saying she was dropping all allegations and that there had been a misunderstanding." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "What happened?" I explained the HOA meeting and the vote of no confidence. Martin listened, nodding occasionally. "So she got removed from the board and suddenly decided you weren't so bad after all," he said dryly. "How convenient." "Well, good. That closes that chapter. How are the clubhouse permits coming?" "I'm meeting with the new engineer this afternoon to go over the final revisions. If everything looks good, I should be able to approve them by the end of the week." "Excellent. Let's get this wrapped up." The meeting with the engineer went smoothly. Tom Brennan, who turned out to be Jeff Brennan's brother, was thorough and professional. We walked through every aspect of the plans, and he made notes on the few remaining items that needed adjustment. By Thursday, I had approved permits in hand, and Mitchell Construction was back at work. I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. 3 weeks later, I was conducting a routine inspection of the clubhouse addition. The framing had been completed, and I was checking to make sure everything met code. I was up on a ladder examining the roof truss connections when I noticed something odd. The trusses were spaced at 24 inches on center, which was acceptable, but the lumber size looked off. I pulled out my measuring tape and confirmed my suspicion. The trusses were made from 2x4s instead of the 2x6s specified in the approved plans. This was a serious problem. The structural calculations had been based on 2x6 lumber, which has significantly more load-bearing capacity than 2x4s. With the smaller lumber, the roof wouldn't be able to handle the required snow load. It was a safety hazard. I climbed down and found Gary Mitchell talking with one of his crew members near the building entrance. "Gary, we have a problem," I said. "The roof trusses aren't what was specified in the plans." His face went pale. "What do you mean?" "The plans called for 2x6 trusses, but you've installed 2x4s. That's not going to work. The structural capacity is completely different." Gary pulled out his phone and scrolled through some photos. "The lumber order was for 2x6s. Let me call my supplier." I waited while he made the call. From his side of the conversation, it was clear that there had been a mix-up. The supplier had delivered the wrong lumber, and Gary's crew had installed it without checking the specifications. "They're willing to replace it for free," Gary said after he hung up. "But we're going to have to tear out all the trusses and start over." "I'm afraid so. I can't pass this inspection with the wrong lumber. It's a life safety issue." Gary looked like he wanted to throw his phone. "This is going to cost us weeks and thousands of dollars." "I understand, but there's no way around it. The building has to be safe," He nodded wearily. Yeah, I know. I'll get my guys on it. I wrote up the failed inspection and left, but something was bothering me. The lumber mix-up seemed too convenient. I'd been doing this job long enough to know when something smelled fishy. Back at the office, I pulled up the lumber supplier's information from the permit application and gave them a call. I spoke with the warehouse manager, a woman named Carol, and asked her about the order for Mitchell Construction. "Let me pull that up," she said. I heard typing in the background. "Okay, here it is. Order was placed February 8th for delivery to the Pine Ridge Estates Clubhouse project. Customer requested 2x4 trusses, which is what we delivered. The customer requested 2x4s. You're sure?" That's what it says right here in the order notes. The call came in from a woman who said she was with the HOA and that they'd decided to change the lumber size to save money. My stomach dropped. "Do you have a name for who called?" Brenda Patterson. Of course it was. I thanked Carol and hung up, then immediately called Gary Mitchell. "Gary, did you authorize anyone from the HOA to contact your lumber supplier?" "What? No. Why?" "Because someone named Brenda Patterson called them and changed your lumber order from 2x6s to 2x4s. There was a long silence. "She did what?" "She told them the HOA wanted to save money by using smaller lumber. The supplier has it documented in their system." Gary exploded into a string of profanity that I won't repeat. When he calmed down, he said, "That's sabotage. She deliberately undermined the construction to make it fail inspection. That's how it looks to me. And if your crew had been less careful, or if I hadn't noticed the problem, that roof could have collapsed under snow load. People could have died. I'm calling the police. This is criminal." "I think that's a good idea. I'm going to document everything on my end and notify the county." I spent the rest of the afternoon writing a detailed report about what I'd found. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was potential criminal sabotage of a construction project, which could have resulted in serious injury or death. Martin called me into his office after he read my report. "This is extremely serious, Rob. If she really did intentionally order the wrong materials to make the project fail, that's criminal." "I know. Gary Mitchell is filing a police report. I think we should too." "Agreed. I'll loop in the county attorney's office." Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The Lakewood Police Department opened an investigation into Brenda's actions. Detectives interviewed Gary Mitchell, Carol from the lumber supplier, and me. They also subpoenaed phone records to confirm that Brenda had made the call to the supplier. Frank Morrison called me on Friday evening. "Have you heard what's going on with Brenda?" "Some of it. I know the police are investigating. She's claiming she never called the lumber supplier, that someone must have impersonated her. But the HOA got a lawyer to look into it, and apparently there's a lot more than just the lumber thing. Our treasurer went through the books and found that Brenda's been using HOA money for personal expenses. We're talking thousands of dollars over the past 8 months. You're kidding." I wish I was. She's been charging meals, shopping trips, even a weekend at a resort in Aspen to the HOA credit card. She claimed they were all business expenses related to HOA management, but there's no documentation, no board approval, nothing. That's embezzlement. Exactly what the lawyer said. We're filing a report with the police about that too. The embezzlement added a whole new dimension to the case. The police expanded their investigation, and the county district attorney's office got involved. I continued with my regular work, trying to stay out of the legal proceedings as much as possible. The clubhouse construction moved forward with the correct lumber, and I conducted inspections at each phase. Everything was being done by the book now, with no more surprises. 2 months later, in early May, I was working on a commercial inspection in Golden when I got a call from a detective named Sarah Winters. Mr. Zimmerman, I wanted to let you know that we've concluded our investigation into Brenda Patterson. She's being charged with multiple counts including attempted criminal mischief, embezzlement, and fraud. Attempted criminal mischief for the lumber sabotage. The DA determined that her actions could have resulted in serious injury or death if the building had been completed and failed under snow load. That bumps it up to a serious charge. What about the embezzlement? She took over $18,000 from the HOA over 8 months. That's a Class 4 felony in Colorado. Combined with the other charges, she's looking at significant prison time if convicted. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I'd never wanted it to go this far, but Brenda had brought it on herself. When's the trial? She's actually negotiating a plea deal. Her lawyer knows the evidence is overwhelming. I'd expect a resolution within the next few weeks. True to Detective Winters' word, Brenda accepted a plea deal 3 weeks later. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzlement and 1 count of attempted criminal mischief. The other charges were dropped as part of the agreement. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with the possibility of early release for good behavior, plus 5 years of probation. She also had to pay full restitution to the HOA for the embezzled funds and to Mitchell Construction for the costs of the lumber replacement. The sentencing hearing was covered in the local news. I didn't attend, but Frank did, and he called me afterward to fill me in. She actually cried and apologized, Frank said. Said she'd gotten overwhelmed with the responsibility of being HOA president and made poor decisions. The judge wasn't buying it, told her that people in positions of authority have to be held to higher standards, not lower ones. How do you feel about it? I asked. Honestly, relieved. She was making everyone miserable, and it turns out she was stealing from us the whole time. I'm glad she's facing consequences. The clubhouse construction was completed in June. The addition turned out beautifully, with a new commercial-grade kitchen, expanded meeting space, and a gorgeous deck with the pergola that had started this whole mess. Frank organized a community barbecue to celebrate, and it felt like the neighborhood could finally relax. I was standing on that deck, watching kids play in the park below when Mrs. Chen came up beside me with a plate of dumplings. "You should try these," she said, offering me the plate. "My grandmother's recipe." I took one and bit into it. It was delicious, savory pork with ginger and scallions. "These are amazing." "Thank you for standing up to Brenda," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy and you could have just ignored the permit problem to avoid trouble, but you did the right thing." "I was just doing my job. It was more than that. You could have looked the other way." "A lot of people would have." She patted my arm. "You're a good man, Rob." After she walked away, I stood there thinking about the past few months. The whole situation had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also reminded me why I became a building inspector in the first place. Codes and regulations weren't just bureaucratic red tape. They were there to protect people, to make sure buildings were safe and communities were livable. Brenda had seen rules as tools for control and power. She twisted regulations to punish people she didn't like and ignored the rules that applied to her. But real laws, real codes weren't about power. They were about safety, fairness, and accountability. Frank came over with 2 beers and handed me one. "Penny for your thoughts." "Just reflecting on everything that happened," I said. "It's been quite a ride." He clinked his bottle against mine. "But we came out okay. The HOA's in good shape now, the clubhouse is done, and Brenda's facing justice. I'd call that a win." "What about the citations she issued?" "Did you ever get those resolved?" "Yep. The review committee went through all of them. Out of 43 citations she'd issued in 8 months, only 7 were actually valid under the bylaws. We refunded everyone's fines for the invalid ones. Came to almost $8,000 that people had paid for made-up violations. I shook my head. That's insane. It is, but it's over now. Frank looked out at the community gathered below, neighbors laughing and talking, kids running around. We're trying to run the HOA the way it's supposed to be run. Reasonable rules, fairly enforced, focused on actually maintaining the community rather than controlling everyone. It's nice. The summer passed peacefully. The new HOA board under Frank's leadership was responsive but not overbearing. They focused on actual maintenance issues, organized community events, and generally left people alone to live their lives. It was what an HOA should be. I continued my work as a building inspector, handling everything from minor residential renovations to major commercial projects. Every now and then, I drive past the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse and see people using the new space for meetings, parties, and community gatherings. It had become exactly what it was supposed to be, a place that brought the neighborhood together. One afternoon in late August, I was wrapping up paperwork at the office when Martin stopped by my desk. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" He sat down across from me. "I wanted to talk to you about that whole HOA situation from earlier this year, specifically how you handled it." I tensed slightly, not sure where this was going. "Okay. You did exactly the right thing at every step," Martin said. "You identified a code violation, you followed proper procedure, you documented everything thoroughly, and you didn't let personal considerations affect your professional judgment. When the situation got complicated, you maintained your integrity. That's what this job requires, and you exemplified it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm saying this because situations like that are hard. When personal and professional lives intersect, it creates pressure to compromise, to look the other way, to avoid conflict. You didn't do any of that. You held the line on what was right, and it cost you personally in terms of stress and hassle, but you never wavered." He stood up. "That's the kind of inspector we need. That's the kind of inspector who keeps people safe." After he left, I sat at my desk feeling a sense of validation. The past months had been difficult, but Martin was right. I'd done what needed to be done, and while it hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. I finished my paperwork and drove home through the late afternoon sunshine. As I pulled into Pine Ridge Estates, I passed kids riding bikes, couples walking dogs, neighbors chatting over fences. It looked like any other suburban neighborhood, peaceful and normal. But I knew the truth. This peace had been hard-won. It had required people standing up for what was right, holding leaders accountable, and refusing to let abuse of power go unchallenged. Every person who spoke up at that HOA meeting, every neighbor who supported the vote of no confidence, every board member who chose truth over convenience, had contributed to this outcome. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. There was no snow on the roof this time of year, but I remembered that Saturday morning in February when Brenda had pounded on my door with her ridiculous citation. At the time, it had seemed like such a small, petty thing, but it had been the spark that exposed a much larger problem. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest stands, a refusal to accept an unjust fine, a decision to issue a stop work order even when it would be inconvenient, a willingness to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. I got out of the car and walked to my front door, key in hand. Inside, my house was cool and quiet, a refuge from the summer heat. I grabbed a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Board meeting tonight, just FYI. Nothing major, mostly discussing landscaping contracts. "You're welcome to attend if you want," I texted back. "I'll pass, but thanks for the heads up. Let me know if anything interesting comes up." 3 dots appeared then. "Will do, and Rob, thanks again for everything you did. We're all grateful." I smiled and set my phone down. The truth was, I hadn't done it for gratitude or recognition. I'd done it because it needed to be done. Because codes and rules and laws only mean something if people are willing to enforce them fairly and consistently. Because safety matters more than convenience, and integrity matters more than comfort. As a building inspector, I saw firsthand what happened when corners got cut, when rules got ignored, when people prioritized speed or cost over doing things right. I'd seen buildings that failed because contractors used cheap materials. I'd seen electrical fires because someone didn't want to pay for proper wiring. I'd seen injuries because handrails weren't installed to code. The clubhouse addition at Pine Ridge Estates could have been another one of those stories. If Gary Mitchell's crew hadn't been paying attention, if I hadn't caught the lumber substitution, that roof could have been completed with undersized trusses. And maybe it would have been fine for a while. Maybe it would have lasted through one winter or two. But eventually, there would have been a heavy snow year. The kind of winter we get in Colorado every few years, where the snow piles up 3 feet deep and stays for weeks. And that roof, built with lumber that couldn't handle the load, would have started to sag. Maybe someone would have noticed. Or maybe they wouldn't have, not until it was too late. I imagined the clubhouse full of people for a community event, maybe a holiday party or a neighborhood meeting. I imagined the roof giving way under the weight of snow, the horrible sound of cracking wood and collapsing structure. I imagined the injuries, maybe deaths, that would have resulted. And then I imagined the investigation that would have followed. The engineers examining the wreckage, discovering the undersized trusses. The lawyers deposing everyone involved. The question that would have come to me eventually. "Mr. Zimmerman, you inspected this building. How did you miss this?" Except I hadn't missed it, I'd caught it. And in catching it, I'd prevented a tragedy. That was the job. That was what all the paperwork and inspections and code books were really about. Not bureaucracy for its own sake, but the prevention of harm, the protection of life. Brenda Patterson had never understood that. To her, rules were weapons to wield against people she didn't like. Authority was power to be abused. The HOA presidency was a throne from which to rule, not a responsibility to serve. But authority without accountability becomes tyranny. Power without responsibility becomes corruption. And rules without fairness become oppression. The justice system had dealt with Brenda's crimes. She was serving her sentence, paying her debt to society. But the broader lesson extended beyond one person's actions. It was about the importance of checks and balances, of community engagement, of ordinary people being willing to stand up and say, "This isn't right." I thought about all the neighbors who'd attended that emergency HOA meeting. Most of them probably would have preferred to stay home to avoid conflict, to let someone else deal with the problem. But they'd shown up anyway. They'd raised their hands to vote. They'd spoken their truth. That took courage. It's always easier to go along, to not make waves, to hope someone else will handle it. But change requires people to step up, even when it's uncomfortable. My phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was my sister, calling from Oregon. "Hey, Rachel," I answered. "Hey. I was just thinking about you and wanted to check in. How are things?" "Good. Busy at work, but good." "And how's the crazy HOA situation? Last time we talked, you were dealing with that nightmare president." "Oh, that got resolved. She actually ended up going to jail for embezzlement and sabotage." "What? Are you serious?" I gave her the short version of the story. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Wow," she finally said. "That's insane. But I'm proud of you for not backing down. A lot of people would have just let it go to avoid the hassle." "Maybe, but it was the right thing to do." "Doesn't make it easy, though," Rachel said. "The right thing rarely is." We talked for a while longer, catching up on family news and making tentative plans for me to visit Portland in the fall. After we hung up, I realized she'd hit on something important. The right thing is rarely easy. If doing the right thing were easy, everyone would do it. It's the difficulty that makes it meaningful. It's the cost that makes it valuable. I'd paid a cost for standing up to Brenda and the HOA. I'd dealt with stress, complaints, an internal review, and months of conflict in my own neighborhood. But I'd also prevented a potentially catastrophic building failure, exposed embezzlement, and helped restore reasonable governance to the community. The benefits far outweighed the costs. As the sun began to set, painting the Colorado sky in shades of orange and pink, I went out to my back deck and sat down with a book. The evening air was warm, carrying the smell of someone's barbecue and the sound of distant laughter. This was what all the struggle had been for: peaceful evenings in a well-managed community, where people could live their lives without fear of arbitrary citations or dangerous buildings, where rules existed to help rather than harm, where accountability kept power in check. The next morning, I drove to work thinking about the clubhouse final inspection scheduled for later in the week. It was just a routine check on some finish work, the last step before issuing the certificate of occupancy. After months of drama, delays, and complications, the project was almost complete. Wednesday arrived and I met Frank at the clubhouse for the final inspection. We walked through the addition together, checking electrical outlets, testing plumbing fixtures, examining the deck railing. Everything was perfect. The work had been done right, with no shortcuts, no substitutions, no compromises. It was exactly what a building should be: safe, functional, and built to last. "Congratulations," I said, signing off on the final inspection. "You're good to go." Frank shook my hand. "Thank you, Rob, for everything. Not just the inspection, but for being willing to do your job even when it made your life harder. That's what I'm here for." As I drove away from the clubhouse, I felt a sense of completion. The project that had started with a routine observation back in January was finally finished. All the conflict, investigation, legal proceedings, and stress had led to this: a building that was safe, a community that was healthier, and accountability restored. The months that followed were blessedly uneventful. I conducted inspections, reviewed plans, answered questions, and did my job without drama or controversy. The HOA, under Frank's leadership, maintained the community without harassment or abuse. Neighbors who'd been fined for invalid citations got their money back. The common areas were maintained. Life went on. In November, almost a year after I'd first noticed the unpermitted construction, I received a letter in the mail from the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. They'd received a nomination for their annual Building Official Excellence Award, and I'd been selected as a recipient. The letter explained that Gary Mitchell had nominated me, writing about how my diligence had prevented a potentially catastrophic building failure, and how my integrity in the face of personal attacks embodied the best of the profession. I was invited to attend an awards ceremony in Denver in January. I accepted, though I felt awkward about being recognized for simply doing my job correctly. The ceremony was held in a hotel ballroom, attended by building officials, engineers, contractors, and government representatives from across the state. When they called my name, I walked to the podium feeling oddly emotional. The presenter, the state building code commissioner, handed me a plaque and shook my hand. Rob Zimmerman exemplifies the critical importance of building inspectors in our communities. His actions prevented a serious structural failure, exposed criminal activity, and demonstrated unwavering commitment to public safety. He is exactly the kind of professional our industry needs. There was applause. I said a few words of thanks, acknowledging Martin, my colleagues, and the importance of the work we all did. Then I returned to my seat, plaque in hand, still processing the recognition. After the ceremony, several people came up to congratulate me and ask about the situation. I answered their questions, emphasizing that I just followed standard procedures and that any good inspector would have done the same. But one older inspector, a man named Harold who'd been in the profession for 40 years, pulled me aside. "Don't downplay what you did," he said quietly. "I've seen plenty of inspectors who would have looked the other way to avoid trouble, especially when it involved their own neighborhood and an HOA willing to make noise. You stood your ground. That matters." His words stayed with me on the drive home. Maybe he was right. Maybe it did matter that I'd chosen the harder path, that I'd accepted the personal cost of doing my job correctly. By the time I pulled into Pine Ridge Estates that evening, it was dark. The neighborhood was lit by streetlights and the warm glow of houses. I could see through windows into living rooms where families were gathered, watching TV or talking or just existing together in their safe, well-built homes. Every one of those houses had been inspected at some point. Someone like me had checked the foundation, the framing, the electrical, the plumbing. Someone had made sure it was built right, built safe. And because of that largely invisible work, these families could live their lives without worrying about their homes collapsing or catching fire or falling apart. That was the real story. Not the drama with Brenda or the awards or the recognition. The real story was the thousands of quiet, competent professionals who showed up every day to do unglamorous work that kept people safe. The inspectors and engineers and contractors who did things right even when no one was watching, even when cutting corners would be easier and more profitable. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house. There was no snow on the roof, no HOA president threatening citations, no conflict or crisis, just a quiet evening at home after a day of work. And that, I realized, was exactly how it should be.